Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Jacob. This is going to be the 15th video in my series on studying JavaScript. Um, to just give a real brief overview, today I got about 5 hours of JavaScript studied, and I'm pretty happy about that. I did a little bit of new experimentation today, such as reading source code slowly, which is a shocker, I'm sure, because I almost always advocate trying to read source code at a fixed rate and to sacrifice comprehension in order to basically get an exposure to a larger ecosystem of files, authors, projects, what have you. That said, I think that there's a lot of utility in reading source code at different speeds, and sometimes it pays really well to slow down and to parse things a little bit more carefully, to prioritize comprehension a little bit more, but still within reason, right? And so I find myself at this juncture, 15 days in, almost 100 hours in, much more comfortable with many things in the syntax, many of the patterns, still struggling with some of the more complex and verbose patterns. Probably the thing I can say most about that is there are some patterns that involve basically creating functions, using type annotations, and passing them as functions to other functions that just get very messy and are difficult for me to parse. And I can read over a couple lines of code and kind of miss the fact that it was just a function initialization statement. This is partly because of how many different ways there are to write functions in JavaScript. What I find is almost no one uses the keyword function. Almost everyone uses just arrow functions, and with arrow functions, you know, sometimes there are curly braces, sometimes there aren't curly braces, and that's a pretty difficult thing to pick up on because you're oftentimes trying to find those things as guidance. Sometimes there's parentheses around the arguments, sometimes there are not, right? Sometimes in the arguments, in the parentheses, there is a type annotation. Sometimes there isn't any parentheses, there's still an argument, and there's a type annotation. And basically you just got to look for that arrow, and if you see that arrow, it's an arrow function. Sometimes it's not obvious where it is, how it is, but it is probably. And that brings me to probably I would say it's one of the core I guess epiphanies maybe is the word, but it's one of the thoughts that I had today. One of the thoughts I had today that I feel very strongly about. In JavaScript, the most important thing is the function declaration. That's it. You heard me say it. Constants, variables, loops, nothing else matters as much as just the declaration of functions. And I say this because it's probably the most ubiquitous thing you see. You see it everywhere. Basically, every module is just made up of a couple functions. Very rarely is it not that. Once in a while, it might be a class. Very rarely. Once in a while, it might just be some constants. More frequently than probably constants or a class, or maybe equally frequently, is just exporting a type or an interface, and it's literally just TypeScript code, right? It's not even real JavaScript code, it's TypeScript. For those of you that have been kind of waffling on like how TypeScript and JavaScript work, I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is, TypeScript, you write it, there are things that understand it, that give you there are static analyzers that scan your code that has TypeScript patterns in it, that understand and walk the entire type tree that your code has, and tell you errors and violations and whatnot, and help you do stuff like autocomplete. Super useful features. But when you actually get down to turning this into something the browser runs, everything gets stripped away. And it's just turned into plain old basic JavaScript again, which is, which is interesting. Um, but yeah, one of the other things that's really strange pattern is where you have a function that's being called, but the parentheses are separated from the function itself, and in between them is a type, right? You see this with, when you're using TypeScript with a promise, with React create, with React forward ref, with React component a lot of the time, I think. I'm sure about the other ones. But like basically that pattern is weird again because you're expecting to see parentheses. It's one of the main visual cues that it is a function that's being called that's going to do something, right? But then those parentheses get delayed and instead you see these brackets and this type. Sometimes it can be a very long convoluted string before you see the parentheses. And it can totally break apart your natural flow of reading JavaScript. That said, there's no way of denying, you just can't deny that the development speed. TypeScript, I'm going to make a controversial statement. TypeScript is meant for writing code. It's not meant for reading code. It may help with reading code a little bit. It definitely does when it's concise enough, clear things up, but when it's not any better. It's just as complicated and ambiguous because you look at a type and you're like, I don't even know what that type really does. It's in another file I haven't even seen. Once you have the entire, project memorized, I guess it's not as big a deal. You're like, I know exactly what that type is. And that's more of like what it's like when you're writing for a project. You do have all these things in the back of your mind and you have the power of an IDE auto-completing everything, right? No denying it's you use TypeScript. I'm going to use TypeScript. That said though, like I said, I really think it's about writing and speed, development accuracy, not making it easier on noobs that are reading your code, right? Yeah, so I spent some time doing that. I spent some time reading this thing called the TypeScript React Cheat Sheet. It was a new resource, super great. I actually spent a handful of, like a small amount of time looking through Python's regex cheat sheet and JavaScript's regex cheat sheet, which is interesting. Another big thing I did was review the CSS grid layout and the CSS flex layout. The grid layout seems more complicated. I don't get it as much. I get it, but I don't really get it. But this is only the second time I've looked through this guy's article, and I'll give this guy a shout out. It's a pretty good, it's not a single guy. It's an entire entity, but it's css-tricks.com. Pretty sweet. I'm gonna learn. I've been learning a bunch of good stuff from it. I think it's a good way for me to get my foot in the door with CSS, get a good vocabulary surrounded it, and then do some more penetrating high level and like more experienced questioning through the browser, and maybe just review some of the resources I did before. Like I feel like I might be ready to read some of that stuff I was crucifying on W3C, the CSS spec for some of the modules. I think I might be capable of reading some of that now. I still might not do it because like at the end of the day, what is CSS? It's just for visually positioning and styling some of your things. You don't need to go into it too deeply. You just need to have some good ass templates for everything you want, and you need to be able to construct stuff. That said, I want my stuff to look really professional, and I want to have good templates, and I want to be fast, and I want to have high quality web apps and sites. So I'm prepared to do what it takes, but I also don't want to get sucked into a whirlpool of diminishing returns. So I studied that a little bit. I studied, I read source code at just a regular speed. Super great for just covering more ground, figuring out things that you don't get, reinforcing some concepts you do. Yeah, I mean, I was going to look through, tomorrow I'm going to be reading through again, just as I've specified before, spaced repetition, my friends, but I'm going to be reading through the JavaScript documentation again, but only for the most important things that I want to review deeper. And those things are in no particular order: the conditional ternary operator, arrow function expressions, object, function, string, regex expression, array, promise, for in loop, for of loop, grouping operator, which is just parentheses, and I already said regex expression. There's probably some more stuff obviously worth going through again, but these are the things that stuck out to me. Some things that I've looked into a little bit more are events. But I guess the last thing that's really kind of worth mentioning is that I added another information resource that I'll probably be reading from. It's the site called codepin.io. What's really cool about it is it has little like blurbs of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS that people can work on and share and run inside of this site's browser. Well, inside of the browser at the site, which is super cool about doing little POCs and demonstrations, mostly of CSS and HTML, but also of maybe a little bit of minor JavaScript that's mostly just manipulating CSS, or yeah, mostly CSS probably on the HTML things. So I'll probably be looking through that source code as well, because it seems like pretty good, and it seems like there's a lot of different people doing stuff, and so you'll see a lot of different permutations. But yeah, so I guess I've talked about a lot of what I've been reviewing. How do I feel about it? I feel the same, man. Like, this is just something you do. I'm on day 15. I'm almost on hour 100. I'm not gonna give up. When the what you do is you plant the seeds and you water the plant and you wait, and eventually you taste the fruits of your labor. At least in my experience, that's very much so what it's like. Although the fruits might not be like quite the flavor you wanted, they're always really satisfying. If I've come to this conclusion that like part of how satisfied you are with something you do is how hard you try, right? If you don't try very hard and you succeed, there's probably going to be a lot of satisfaction from that, and like a different kind of satisfaction. But if you don't try that hard and you don't succeed, you're obviously not going to have that much satisfaction. But if you try really hard and you succeed, it means a lot. It means a lot to you, because you've put a lot. It's kind of just like a tautological, psychological thing. Human being put lot into thing go were, and human being happy about it, right? And so I think that I actually think it's a recipe for a more substantial type of satisfaction that people can carry with them, right? Just try really hard at something, harder than you ever thought you could, and don't give up. And I think you'll actually find you're quite satisfied, at least for a short term. Like, I know for me specifically, like, in my past, I have tried really hard on stuff like programming, and I still have gone through phases where I kind of don't feel super great about the stuff that I've done. The honeymoon phase is over, and I'm like, well, I don't even care about this anymore. This project, I worked on it for so long, and then, but then if you let even more time go by, you're like, wow, I'm really impressed that I could do this. I can't even believe that's so cool. And so just stick with it. And, to wrap this video up and keep it a little bit shorter than, well, it's still pretty long, but to wrap it up, I just want to say thanks for watching. Drop a message or a comment or a question in the chat. Obviously, I'm mostly interested in that, but if you don't want to do that, but you still want to check out some of my other stuff, I love to drive traffic to my blog too, although I'd rather actually have a conversation with a person. or exchange some information or something. So my blog is at pieharbor.com. It's the same as the name of this site. It's sort of like the focal point of, I guess, what I'm trying to do right now, but it's really just the beginning of my internet exploration and journey. So thanks for watching, and peace out and stay safe.